Hey everyone, in this video we are going to be talking about variables in science. We're going to be talking about what variables are, the types of variables in science, how you can talk about them, write about them, and describe them in your IA. I'm going to put timestamps in the video description, so if you already know about variables, you already get the idea about them, then you can skip to the part where I talk about how you can display them in your IA, so it's really clear and nice to see for the examiner. But we're gonna get started by talking about what variables are in science, because that's important. Variables are super fundamental to science, so if you can understand the relationship and the meaning between the independent, dependent, and controlled variables, that's gonna really set you up into getting a good IA score, because you're really gonna understand like the fundamentals behind what all of this science stuff means. So in science, we're trying to figure out truth about the world. We're trying to figure out it works basically. So we do these fun experiments looking for cause and effect relationships. And these relationships that we're looking for should explain how things happen and why things happen. In science, in order to find these relationships, what we do is we design experiments which allow us to observe a change on one thing if another thing is changed. And by things, I mean variables. A variable is a factor, trait, or condition that can exist in different amounts or types. An experiment consists of 3 different types of variables: independent, dependent, and controlled. And to explain these, I'm going to try and keep it simple. So, firstly, we have the independent variable. This is the variable that you are going to change in one particular way in your experiment. And the way you're going to change this is going to be in set amounts that you can control. It might be temperature, which you change by 10 degrees with each trial, or it might be mass, where you increase by 100 degrees at a time. Essentially, the independent variable is the variable that you have the control to alter, so you can see its effects on the dependent variable, which we're going to talk about now. The independent variable is only ever going to be one variable. If it's more than one variable, then that's just going to mess up your whole experiment, because you're not going to be sure, is the dependent variable changing because of the flowers or the cats or the monkeys? I don't know. You need to make it one. If you want to do a good experiment, you're always going to be optimizing for having only one independent variable. Once you get more than 1 or 2 independent variables, it becomes like, it's like a relationship. It gets complicated when you add more things into the picture. Not hating against polygamous people, but I'm just saying, it gets complicated when more things come into the play. So then you have your dependent variable. This is the variable that you are going to measure. This is the variable you're going to take out your little ruler stick and measure. May that be the distance traveled, the mass produced, the gas collected, the temperature change. Whatever it is that you're measuring in your experiment, that's the dependent variable. So once you're writing up your data, the independent variable is going to be the one where you already know all the values for it. So like you have your mass on one side and 1 kilogram, 2 kilogram, 3 kilogram, 4 kilogram, but then you have that other table where you're actually like taking measurements and like writing that down into your book. Those are the dependent variables, because those are the ones you are measuring. This is like the independent variable, where it's only ever going to be one thing, but that doesn't mean that you are only going to take measurements on one thing. You may be taking measurements on other things, but the measurements you are taking down on for the dependent variables are the measurements that you see to believe are directly related to the change in the independent variable. And finally, there's the controlled variable. And unlike the independent and the dependent variable, the controlled variable would be a long list of things. We would like to do our experiments all in a vacuum where we can only have one thing and see how one thing affects the other. But that's just not really viable in this situation. We have other outside forces around us. But we can attempt as scientists to control the outside world so that we can still conduct this experiment with some degree of accuracy. So pretty much the controlled variable is a huge list of things which you are keeping your eye on to make sure it doesn't change too much. So like temperature in the room, right? That's going to be a controlled variable, because if suddenly it becomes extremely hot in the room and all of your gas flies out of your test tube, it's not going to be because of whatever reaction's going on there. It's going to be because of the temperature that goes up. So temperature is a good variable to control. So hopefully this was just revision for you guys. Let's now move into how you can structure your variables. So I think most people understand variables and they understand what they are, but I do see a lot of the times in kids' IAs, which I read, kids have a lot of trouble describing the variables and talking about them and presenting them in a way that's like nice and coherent. There are various ways to do this. You could write about them all in a chunky paragraph and it could look terrible. You could put them in dot points if you want, but personally I found it best to try and organize them in a table. There are various ways you can do this. There's not one right way to talk about your variables, but I found the best way is that you organize them in the table. This makes it look good, it's easier to read, and it also makes sure that you don't forget anything. It's a lot easier to just show you how to do this rather than explain it to you, so I'm going to show you guys how I do this in my chemistry IA. The way I do this in my chemistry IA isn't the only way to do this. You can change this up and alter it to fit your needs, but I think this is a pretty standard way to do it, doing a normal simple hands-on experiment. If you're doing a simulation, I don't know what you can do. If you're doing a database, I don't know what you can do. This is for those simple hands-on experiments that you're doing. So yeah, let's look into it. Okay, so first we're going to be looking at how to structure the independent variable. So for the independent variable, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a table with 3 columns. In the first column, you have the variable, in which you describe the independent variable that you are going to change. So for me, this was the time electrode. And then in the second table, you have the values that you used. Oh my god, my dog is here. My god, hello, full moon. This is full moon. We rescued him, not really me, but he came to our place. Oh my goodness, you're getting my computer dirty. So here's where I describe what I'm gonna do. I say I'm gonna take measurements for the time every 2 minutes for 20 minutes. So that comes out to a total of 10 increments. Then I have a column called how I measured it. And in this column, I describe exactly how I was able to measure this amount of time. This gets me exploration points because I detailed how careful I was in my method. It lets the examiner know, based off like how I describe it, that I was actually being careful with the independent variable that I was measuring, and I wasn't just doing it on a whim, like with my iPhone, or like I was just counting the time in my head or something. I was actually measuring time in a way that made sure that my experiment was super accurate. If you're doing like a centripetal motion experiment and you're like, you've got a ball and a string and you're spinning it like this and you're trying to measure the time, how did you make sure that you spun the thing around for 5 circles rather than 6 circles? Explain that. So as you can see here, for the how it was measured section from my IA, I say zinc electrodes were placed in a beaker with zinc solution before the power system was turned on. Using a stopwatch, not your iPhone, not thinking it in your head, I began the timer while simultaneously turning on the power. At 2 minutes, the timer was stopped and the power was simultaneously switched off. The electrodes were removed from solution. Here you can show your personal engagement and you can show that you're really particular and accurate with your method, and that's what you want to have in a good science IA. We want to be accurate here, we want to be precise. Science. Accuracy is key. Okay, so that's it for the independent variable table. Then we've got the dependent variable table right underneath. This one is super simple. So in one column you mention the dependent variable, and then in the next column you describe how it's measured. In your experiment, your dependent variable may be like a bit tricky to measure. You may have to do some tricky shit to like make sure you get the measurement right. If you have to go through some struggle to actually measure the thing that you're measuring, explain this in this paragraph, because that shows personal engagement, that shows you want to be accurate, that shows that you like sacrifice yourself for science, that shows accuracy, that shows action within your experiment. Now if I look at my dependent variable really wasn't that hard to measure, so there's not much to go into detail here. But if yours is complicated, if you had to like stand on a rock with like a blowhorn and like an eyeglass or something to measure something, I don't even know, describe it here. For example, for mine, between each time increment, electrodes were taken out of solution, measured using an OAS digital balance. I say that because accuracy, and then placed back in solution for the next time increment until it had been electrolyzed for 20 minutes in solution. A total of 10 mass readings were taken for each electrode per trial. So rather than just stating the independent variable, I'm detailing exactly how I measured it. If I can say anything about the IA, a little bit of effort goes a long way. I don't have to do this. I could just list them all. But doing this just adds that extra little oomph to my IA. Extra little detail, extra little information, extra little personal engagement to show I'm being active in my experiment really can go a long way. So finally, moving on to our controlled variable section. This is the most important because unlike the independent and dependent, there are many different variables we are going to be dealing with. For the controlled variables, you'll have 3 different columns. First the variable, then how it was controlled, and then the significance. And then below there, you would have a long list of different variables. You can split this up into different sections by having headers. That's what I did. I really like structure my IA, so yeah, that's what I did. You could easily just skip over the how it was controlled section and significance section if you like didn't care too much, but I'm telling you, these are really important and they get you marks and it looks really good on your IA. So I'm going to go over these sections in a bit of detail. So in the how it was controlled section, you want to carefully detail how you tried to control that variable. You don't want to act as if you had complete control over this. This is a mistake that I see a lot of people make, because essentially having complete control over it is impossible. But instead you want to describe how you tried to control the variable. So for example, rather than saying, oh yeah, I controlled temperature by closing all of the doors and turning off the AC and I completely controlled it. You can't just control the temperature by closing the doors. Instead you would say that, oh, I monitored the temperature by checking the temperature every 20 minutes, and based off my readings the temperature didn't change much, therefore temperature is unlikely to have much of an effect on my experiment, therefore I feel like I effectively controlled it. Okay, so for example on my IA, I said the room temperature was monitored using a thermometer. Temperature ranged between 27 23 and 25 degrees, so it is unlikely temperature would have had a large effect on the experiment. Another example is that I needed my electrodes to be a specific weight. Now, it's impossible that I would have ever made them exactly the same, but I can describe how I tried my best to make them as similar as possible. I describe how I tried to cut them at the same length and width using a ruler, and how I paired them up and weighed them on a measuring scale and adjusted them a bit until they were of similar weight. It's really important to try and control variables because you want to be doing good science here, and to be doing good science you really need to take control over and monitor all of your variables. So describing how you did this is good because it makes your method seem more legit, and that like you're more of a legit, accurate, like careful scientist. Doing science is not about whipping shit together and making giant explosions. It's about paying really careful attention to things, and that's what you want to get down here in this IA. Next to this, at least in my structure, you would have the significance column. Here you write a few notes on why you had to control that variable. Now again, you don't have to do this, but I would highly recommend it because it shows your understanding of variables and like the scientific method and being accurate and stuff. Here you want to show the significance of controlling this variable to your experiment. Like, why do you even have to control this variable? What role does this variable have to play in your experiment? Like, for example, take temperature. Why do you have to control temperature? Well, if you're doing like a chemical reaction, you would say that you have to control temperature because temperature affects the rate of reaction. Reference collision theory. Why do you have to control the temperature? Well, because if you don't control the temperature, then the reaction is going to go bonker. If you suddenly throw it over a Bunsen burner, then the reaction is going to go so much more faster than it usually does. Don't overcomplicate this section. It's really easy to overcomplicate it. Just state like the simple facts, you know? So for example, let's take one of my controlled variables, voltage and current. I needed to make sure that I had a constant electrolysis rate, so I needed to make sure that the voltage and the current were constant. So I monitored these using an ammeter and a voltmeter. I couldn't directly go in there and control the electrons and make sure that there was accurate current, but I do say that I monitored these using a voltmeter and an ammeter. It's good that I mentioned this because I double up on my method points right there. And the reason why I needed to control these is simply because, which I write in my significance section, is a higher current will result in a higher electrolysis rate. That's it. So if you're worried, thinking about, stressing about, I don't know what the significance of this variable is to my experiment, does it increase something or does it decrease something? Just say that. Oh, this variable increases this and that's bad. This variable will decrease this and that's bad. Don't overcomplicate it. One last tip for the controlled variables is that don't add in a controlled variable that's not directly involved in your experiment. Like, whilst I was helping other people with IAs, they would like put in controlled variables but then say, oh, this wasn't actually in the IA, so I didn't need to control it. Well then why are you putting it there? Only put variables that are directly like within the experiment. So that's all I have for you guys today. Thanks for watching this video. I hope this helps someone. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you wanna DM me a question on Instagram, you can do so. If you wanna leave a comment below, you can, and I'll try to get back to you. That's all I have for this video, and I'll see you guys next time.